morning, everyone. Thanks for taking some time to sit down. I guess this morning, the presentation I'm doing this morning comes from a conversation that Sid and I had about basically the forum coming up. And as an end user, we talked about, well, you know, he asked me, what have you been doing in the last little while? It might be of interest to people. And he talked to me about renewable energy projects and things like that going on. And I said, well, yeah, actually, we've been through one of those, which was an interesting discussion. And it was great in the forum this morning just to listen to some of the people talk. Steve talked about how, you know, there's opportunities where, as we look at new solar sources and new sources of power like solar, some of the implications of what that means to a team. And so I think that's really sort of the background of what happened to us. And I guess this whole thing reminds me of basically, you know, you go to buy a new car and basically you wonder, you know, what kind of things should I be asking? And at the end of the discussion, you find out this car will do all these wonderful things, but you never asked about whether it actually comes with a spare tire or not, right? And I don't know how many adventures we've been on like that, but this one's a bit like that. So I'm going to give you some background on sort of the project, and then I'm going to go through what I've called my project memoirs, which will just give you perspective of maybe a little bit about Mark learned on the project. So who's EPCOR to start with? We're a utility company with operations in Western Canada, basically based out of Edmonton, but we also have regional sites that we support out of the Edmonton area, which provide their own unique opportunities for learning when it comes to supporting. We're also doing some work in Ontario now. Our cybersecurity office, basically from the OT side, actually is going to be monitoring the Ontario SCADA systems that we have out there. EPCOR also is in Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, a different division, a different group working on that. But with that, I'm part of the water utility. There is an electricity side, so there's water and power. I'm on the water side, basically, as I said, based out of Edmonton. So with that, I'm going to talk today about the A.L. Smith water treatment plant, basically the addition to it of a solar farm and a battery storage project. And of course, this comes back to looking at you know, what are different companies looking at when it comes to energy efficiency and sustainability, right? What are we going to do? And so E.L. Smith is one of two plants serving the Edmonton area, basically a population of about 1.5 million. We also have pipelines that go out of Edmonton out to many of the rural sites, actually some of them quite extensively further out than you would typically expect. So what was implemented was basically it's 30,350 solar panels. So if you look at that, what looks like sort of a gray area at the background, that's not a lake, okay, unless you want to call it a solar panel lake, that's what it is. Basically a bunch of solar panels that have been put in place. And again, as you put your presentations, I don't know what different organizations, but as I put my presentation through basically looking at corporate communications, there were some greenhouse gas reduction numbers that I had, which I can't share with anyone. Anyway, it's a good news story. The exact number is yet to be determined, I was told, so I can't share it with you. But good news story about greenhouse gas reduction in it. And just to give you a sense of how big is the plant, it's actually it provides about half the power that the A.L. Smith power plant would require. And how big is the plant? Well, up to 400 megaliters a day, which if you divide that by 4, you're going to get to gallons, which might be a little more familiar for some of you folks. So if you look at the title, I was going to get, maybe if I had t-shirts to give away, I was going to see who could pronounce the name of this actual solar farm, okay? But then I thought maybe I'm not quite pronouncing it right either. So, basically it's Kisakau Pisum Solar Farm, and it's basically Cree for daylight sun. And of course, one of the things as you're looking at establishing renewable energy in these different locations is basically working with the people that were part of the land that were there before you, right? And so a lot of work EPCOR's actually had to do in actually releasing this. Of course, this is part of the River Valley, and as in most cities, River Valley is a very special place where people like to congregate and do things. So if you're going to turn around and take an acre or two of land and put basically solar panels on it, there's going to be a lot of discussion around how to do that right and what that looks like. And so that was part of our journey and part of the discussion here. So moving on to talk at a high level. And so basically, you know, my team is responsible for basically the cybersecurity and basically the monitoring, as well as the implementation design. So I have HMI design people. I've also always had what I call SIS people, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, but that's not safety instrumented systems. That's basically what I call SCADA information systems people. And so basically I've always had people on my team that have IT backgrounds, right? We call them, they're not IT folks, but they're the folks that do the networking and do the firewalls and do all that stuff. We don't do that, leave that to IT, we leave it in-house. And so on my team I have people, and always have had people that do those kind of items and maintain that system. We're completely separate from basically the IT systems, okay? And every year we prove that by unplugging and disconnecting between ourselves and and corporate, and saying, yes, we can actually run without being connected to corporate. The plant will still produce water. This plant will produce water. Our wastewater plant will still continue to treat wastewater without being connected to IT corporate. So as a part of that, that's interesting because it brings you into this journey of discussion of saying, so are we building a solar project, okay? So the solar project is going to actually connect to us, okay, and it's going to provide water for E.L. Smith, and that's a great project. But how do you deal with a project like that? So it's a much different project than we'd had in the past. Like typically, I mean, if we're putting in new filters, a new control system in the plant, something that's going to be impacting our process, we're all over that. We've got standards around how to do that. We've got core competencies. We know exactly what needs to be done. We know what our cybersecurity team is going to do. We know how we're going to monitor it, what software we're going to have running, et cetera, et cetera. But if we're doing it on the outside like this, all of a sudden we're being told by the organization, well, no, this is a plant that just sort of runs out there and it's just going to provide power, right? You know, that's basically what's going to happen. And so from that perspective, it's like we talked about and heard in the main session this morning. There's that sort of sense of what are some of the core competencies that my team, like we're great at, you know, we go through and do control narratives when it comes to process plant, and we stamp those, and we have, you know, under professional guidance and all those kind of things, we have that responsibility. But when it comes to a solar farm, what do we really know about solar farm? What do we know about actually the control strategies that are required for that and those kind of things? Plus, we have a 6 megawatt battery storage. So we're not just providing power during the daytime, but we're actually providing power to the batteries. They're storing it, and then in the off hours, they're actually feeding that back. So now we're getting different groups that actually have to interact in regard to what is this going to look like in the future. And of course, some of the challenges that come with that. You've got consultants, and of course, this is no different than any other project. You've got engineering design consultants and contractors, and you've got the distribution system, electrical people come in, you've got the electrical regulators, which of course, we in the water business don't have to deal with typically, so we don't have those kind of things. We've got the vendors for the solar panels, the battery system, the electrical switchgear, the control system. So all these people are over here working, building this system where it's basically just, to us, supposed to be another utility, right? I mean, it's basically going to provide some power to us, and it's no different than if it was coming from the grid, right? I mean, why would they depend on us to do anything? Well, as it turns out, it's interesting, I'm going to share with you, and these reference note opinions expressed are those of the presenter and not EPCOR Water, okay? So I'm opening up some of my playbook, and I'm going to share with you sort of project memoirs, things that, you know, maybe at the end of this you'll all say, well, Mark, you should have known that. And maybe that's the case, but some of these things maybe are forgotten. And I'm hoping, if nothing else, you'll look at this from a perspective of saying these are items that as you go into a project like this, you just need to be aware of. And the old saying, don't assume anything, right? And from that perspective. So the first one I found was the strong OT systems expertise is critical. I guess the challenges we had, the consultant and vendors interface with each other on the network elements, while they were really good on, like the battery guys are really good, and the solar panel guys are really good, and the people doing the electricity side were really good, their talking and the way they put things in didn't really work well together, right? And so basically as the customer who's actually looking at this, you're looking at this saying, well guys, if you do this and you do this, those things aren't going to work well together, right? And they look at each other and said, well, yeah, okay, and then we'll talk, you know, as a customer, you're saying, is that really my job? Well, no, but do I care? Yes, I do, right? From a perspective of making sure that this works. So the need to see the big picture and actually prompt them on some of these things. We had a real desire to keep the solar and the water plants network separate. We weren't trying to bring these together. Again, this was going to be more of a utility for us. I didn't need solar to produce water, right? And in the future, that may differ. And as I listened to the session this morning where we talked about some of the way utilities are being looked at, and we're all being looked at in the future, probably isn't going to be an option. You're not going to be able to say, well, if the solar is not working today, we can just pull from the grid. But there is that sense of saying, you know, when it comes to actually producing water for people, I didn't need to. The lack of the water utility customer knowledge regarding electrical requirements. That was one of the things too. We heard in the last session about core competencies, and that was a core competency we didn't have. We didn't know about the NERC-CIP regulations, how big should this be, what are some of the implications, what are some of the cybersecurity implications that we might need to look at from a perspective if we actually had to do it. And basically, we had one of the contractors on the project actually come onto site, took the whole network down during the commissioning phase because, again, they were trying to do something where they didn't see the big picture. And I actually had my team having to go out and actually get the system running again, which, of course, you know, we weren't supposed to have to do that. We were going to be over here, and it wasn't going to be part of our picture that we needed to worry about, but that wasn't the case, okay? So I guess as a reference note, I just said, you know, have strong, what I'm calling, you know, OT information systems expertise being available during the development and the commissioning of a project. It's something that I didn't expect we would need to do. I didn't expect to have to dedicate one person almost on my team to help with the project to actually go through and understand some of these things and make sure that some of these things are right. And I guess in a sense, as we talk about it, we all recognize the shortage of of people that are out there, right? There's a shortage of people. And as you're getting consultants in and then vetting those people as to who you're actually getting, understanding what you're actually going to have on your team, on your project team, is something that I'll do in the future to make sure that we understand who's who in the zoo and what their role and experience really is. So that's my first one to share with you. The next one is basically definition of remote support. Of course, we were being told that these are packaged systems that you guys don't support. We support remotely, especially during the warranty period. So they're going to come in and they're saying that they're responsible for doing this. We're not supposed to touch the systems during this period of time. And of course, they wanted to connect from anywhere. And of course, with the action of people being at home after COVID and everything else, there's lots of different places. But we needed to support the corporate IS requirements, 2FA, define static IP address, or at least a range of addresses, VPNs and stuff. And the interesting thing through all of this discussion, of course, is we had the people up front identified as some of the support people that would require remote support. And being in Edmonton, of course, remote can mean you're getting it from quite a distance sometimes when you come to your support agreements. But the interesting thing we found is that there was vendors who didn't know that they would need access, okay? And so we assumed up front, which was a good assumption. One of the things we did right was to assume that anybody who's working on this project who has a control system on it is probably going to need some level of support, because we had people at the last minute coming in and said, we didn't need support, we didn't think we needed support, we need support, oh, by the way, tomorrow, please, right? And so looking at trying to get it through your organization and trying to get through my IT organization, approvals for someone to actually remotely access is significant, and it's not something you can do in a day. So working at it. So again, a suggestion and a learning for us that I put in my project memoirs is basically assume remote access will be required, all parties involved, and working through it if you're not taking it over directly. So. Definition of support activities as well. This was an interesting one as we worked through with the solar system hardware and HMI. Sort of the standard package software is obviously different than water plant systems. So right now we're using GI Fix as our HMI. We have Modicon and Allen Bradley PLCs as basically part of our SCADA systems, depending on which plant you're in. But basically, we're transitioning to Ignition. And so one of the software packages that's going to be a part of the solar is actually Ignition-based, which is great for our team. We understand it. But the other one is basically another vendor that we're basically not supported at this point in time. And so, again, in the discussions with them and providing support and the support agreements, the question came up, so I guess you guys are supporting this remotely for us now, right? We're not involved. You're going to be doing this for us. So when are you guys, we're just curious, when are backups going to be done? How are they going to be stored? Like, all of those things that when the ISAT, the auditors come in to audit us against our NIST 882 standard, all the questions they're going to ask us are going to have to be asked these people as well, right? And so basically we're saying, we can't answer for you what kind of security policies you have in place or what you're doing. We need to know what they are. And I guess I was a little surprised at how hard that was to get from them initially, okay, in the discussion. And so, just questions like, so system upgrades and patching, okay, how's that going to be done? How are you going to maintain that? Some of those questions. The management of change process for vendors during the warranty and support period. I guess their role and support required really to review how everyone is involved and how they're doing. So it's, again, we saw a bit of well, we're the battery guys and this is the way we do it. Yeah, but you realize if you do it that way, you're going to screw up the way the solar panels are actually being interconnected in their systems at the same time. And so how are we going to manage some of those things? So again, from my experience going through this, some vendors may need some coaching as we go through this and looking at opportunities for how we can actually implement this in a way that is sustainable and in a different way than we talked about it earlier this morning. Certainly on the cybersecurity protection side, this was interesting. The challenges, again, not being familiar with the electricity side and sort of what they use for malware protection and stuff. Malware protection is not new. Basically, when I talked to, especially a lot of their electrical people over there, it was like, yeah, you guys are running, okay, yeah, that's good. What are you guys doing? Well, we do different things. And the vendor response is like, we'll do whatever the customer wants. And I'm sort of saying, well, that's nice, I guess, on the one hand, but I kind of like to know, like, when you put in the other solar panels and the other battery systems with other customers, what have you done there? Like, what have you used? What do you know works with your systems? Our regional sites, when we put in our cybersecurity monitoring from Edmonton basically out to the sites, we got blamed for loading down their networks, and that's why their networks are running so slow now. They were running slow long before we put our cybersecurity monitoring on their systems, but we got blamed for it and got, the thing. So again, we're looking at the perspective of saying, what does that look like? Again, for you, we don't want to be in a situation where things aren't working and there's a sense of our cybersecurity monitoring is the reason for that. So again, I guess what I would talk to vendors, and I really would ask as a customer, at least I would appreciate, if you're divine and provide options. Like, so when it comes to things like malware protection, those kind of things, to sort of say, well, we'll do whatever you want. I'd really like to know, what do you do? What have you done elsewhere? And what does that look like? Because that really helps in actually implementing things. And again, it's one of those areas of competencies, as we talked about this morning, that would be nice to have. When it comes to monitoring, the challenges, again, we desire to monitor the systems. We want to keep it initially separate from the Cybersecurity Center. That's not the way it's happening. We're actually going to be monitoring the system now. I mean, our existing OT monitoring, we're using Nozomi and SCADAfence, QRadar as our SIM, and Rapid7 to pull information off of Microsoft boxes. Especially during the warranty and the initial startup phases, we wanted to be careful about what, again, as I mentioned, what we were putting on their system, because we didn't want to be the guys, well, your solar system isn't working, it's because you guys went and put this security stuff on, right, and et cetera, et cetera. So, working through the issues related to that have been interesting from a perspective of going forward. And so again, on this one, I guess that customers, at least this one, would appreciate if vendors, you're to define and provide options again. So, if we were going to say, remote monitoring could be provided for this system. It's a standalone system. It's a plant that's sitting over here. You're just pulling power from it. You're not doing any control or anything special on it. You could actually get cybersecurity from any of the organizations you have here at a certain thing, and it's been set up already, and here's the keys. Like, you don't have to build it yourself, or you don't have to tell us what you want to build. So from that perspective, I guess those are some of the top ones, again, that we learned through the project. Again, just sharing with you some things that, maybe in retrospect, it's things we should have known, okay? But on hindsight, it's things we're going to ask and we'll get involved with more next time. So, and if there's a link here, if you're interested in any of the solar farm information. So, thank you.